Welcome to topic 1.2, the planned city-states of the Indus Valley. The goal for this lesson is for you to be able to walk away from these notes being able to describe key aspects of the Indus Valley civilization, including its rise and fall. By key aspects, we're talking about their technology that makes them stand out, the role of religion in their society, and how their government operated and their complex institutions in general. Make sure you're following along on your note sheet, filling in those blanks, and adding whatever notes you need to. Alright, let's get started. The first key question we're going to attack here is what are the origins of the Indus Valley Bronze Age civilizations? That is, where did they come from, and why was this a good spot to start your civilization? Remember, the first four key areas that we see civilizations pop up in the world are all along River Valley. If you're following along in class, we've already talked about Mesopotamia here. We'll be covering Egypt in China in upcoming lessons, but right now we're going to focus right here on the Indus Valley region. It's called the Indus Valley region because it's centered along the Indus River right here. Other key features you'll notice here is the Himalayas right here, the tallest mountains in the world. These are going to provide some natural protections for these cultures. You'll also notice it's by the Arabian Sea, and it's not too far off from Mesopotamia. Yes, it's quite a distance from them, but it's easier to get there than it is China because of the Himalayan mountains right here. So we will be seeing some interaction between the Harappan Indus Valley culture over here and the Mesopotamian cultures we've already studied. So around 7,000 years ago, humans start to realize this is a pretty good region to settle along the Indus Valley, and this is because the river valley produces a lot of silt or fertile soil that's great for farming. It really gives those plants the nutrients they need and fresh nutrients every year because the river regularly floods, bringing in new soil, and that water is also good for your crops. Additionally, the region provides some natural barriers that prevents outside invaders from coming in and attacking your settlements. You'll notice if you look closely on this map, not only are the Himalayas right here, but you see several other mountain ranges right on the other side of the Indus Valley that makes it difficult to get through. You'll also notice that there are some deserts, like the Thar Desert here, that provides an additional layer of protection. Other benefits that aren't listed here in your notes are the monsoon winds. Now, the monsoon winds are very predictable winds that every year in the summer months blow in from the Indian Ocean or the Arabian Sea, and that brings in a lot of humidity, a lot of rain, and again, that's pretty good for your crops. Now, this predictability of the wind of blowing in from the Arabian Sea in the summer months and out to the Arabian Sea in the winter months is something we're going to come back to because these regular winds are going to create a trade network across the Indian Ocean that's going to connect India to Middle Eastern cultures, African cultures, and Chinese cultures eventually when we get to that part of history. For now, they're just really good for farming. Now, it's important to know that less is known about these cultures than other Bronze Age civilizations, and we're still kind of developing our knowledge of them. What we do know is that by about 3200 BCE, which is about 5,200 or so years ago, villages start popping up along the Indus River, right? So they're farming before this, but really these larger village settlements don't start developing until around 3200 BCE, and then it takes about 700 years before some of these villages start to develop into more complex cities around the year 2500 BCE, which is about 4,500 years ago. Now, their location along rivers is really important because this makes the cities hubs for trade routes, right? So people sail down the rivers here and they start to trade with the farming villages and the cities that are on them, and then those wares get brought to the cities where there's more trading. And so that's how some of these start to develop into those main cities of the region. All right, let's talk about the role that trade and technology plays in the development of the civilization since we've started talking about trade already. As mentioned earlier, some of these early villages then develop into major cities because of their locations as key hubs on trade routes along the Indus Valley. These trade routes connected the Indus Valley cultures to the northwest, where we see Mesopotamian cultures developing, as well as cultures further to the south they start to trade with down here in the Deccan Plateau region. Again, you notice this is between two rivers, as there are civilizations starting to develop down there as well. So what's being traded along these routes? We found evidence of gold and silver work from Mesopotamia showing up in the Indus River Valley, indicating that there is trade between these two regions. Now, so that's what the Indus Valley is getting from Mesopotamia. Well, what are they giving back in trade? And that is where we get cotton cloth is highly prized, and the cotton's being grown in the Indus Valley, turned into cloth, and then being traded up to Mesopotamia for those gold and silver works. Further south, right, the cotton being grown up here is being traded to these southern Indian cultures for precious stones like jasper, agate, and others. A lot of these red stones that look really pretty, but they're not like considered high value today, like diamonds and sapphires and things like that. Now, technologically speaking, the Indus Valley was pretty advanced for their time, more advanced than a lot of these other cultures in some ways. So the cities themselves were laid out in very precise patterns. So you can see these really straight lines on the streets, right? So that's kind of a grid system. And then the bricks used in the buildings are pretty standard size, right? You can see some variation in them, but they're generally, you can see like these bricks right here are all about the same size. And this is actually more difficult to do than you'd think. So there's some standardization here. And they also are building citadels, these fortifications that at least that's what we think they were for, in order to protect them from potential outsiders. Though there isn't a lot of evidence of warfare in this region, so we're not really quite sure at this time. Another thing that makes this culture stand out is their advanced plumbing and sewer systems found in cities like Mohenjo-Daro, which is a major city found on the western side of the Indus River. Now, the sewer system is impressive because it seems like most homes, or pretty much all homes, even smaller, modest homes, have private bathrooms with brick toilets. That's right, they had indoor plumbing in the Bronze Age. They even had underground sewers with clay pipes and manholes for maintenance. This is something you really don't see in other cultures for a few thousand years after this. Another thing you might find impressive is that they also had private baths where people could take showers by taking pitchers of water and pouring them over their heads, which, okay, that's not a huge innovation. What is the innovation here is that the wastewater then drains through clay pipes into brick sewers that run below the streets. And this is what they look like. Here's the exposed, because there'd be something on top of this. And these sewers had manholes, which I said earlier, so that people could go down there and actually clean them out in case they get clogged. If you ever had clogged pipes in your house, sewer pipes in your house, having access to clean that out is pretty important, and they kind of figured this out thousands of years before most other people. That's pretty impressive if you ask me. Now, all the effort, time and effort, and resources being put into this tells you that cleanliness seems to be something that's probably important to this culture. So a lot of this technology is far ahead of other ancient cities, as I said, not matched into modern times, right? Indoor plumbing. There are parts of America that did not get indoor plumbing and private bathrooms in their houses until just several decades ago. So good on them for this. All right, let's switch gears now and talk about the religion of this culture. Right? What role did religion play in their civilization? So let's first talk about what were their religious beliefs. So there's some evidence of animal worship, especially bulls. Today in India, you might be aware that cows are seen by many in the Hindu faith as a sacred animal, and we're seeing the origins of this even way back in the Bronze Age. Like a lot of culture, there's evidence of a cult worshiping a fertility mother goddess right here as depicted in this image in this person's hand. Fertility is really important for many reasons, right? We're talking about plant fertility for your crops to produce food for you, but also the fertility of women to have children, as children are important to all cultures around the world. We also start to see early hints of a Shiva-like figure. Shiva, you may be aware of, is an important god to the later Hindu faith. So this isn't Hinduism. This is kind of a proto or pre-Hinduism, and we see the later Hindu faith taking from the religious ideas of this earlier Indus Valley culture and then incorporating it into the faith of Hinduism. This idea of taking the ideas of older religions and incorporating them into a new religion is something we're going to see a lot in this class. It's one of those trends that are going to keep repeating. Okay, so those are the religious beliefs, or some of the beliefs of this culture. How did that actually impact their culture? Well, the priests likely played a key role in praying for harvest and flood protection. Now, you remember that floods are really important for these cultures. They settle by river valleys because that regular flooding brings with it not just water, but also silt, new fertile soil they can use for planting crops. If that flooding happens too late, well, then they may have already planted their crops, and it could flood them away. If it doesn't happen at all, well, then there isn't going to be the fertile soil they need for planting those crops. And if it happens irregularly, well, then you can't properly plan for having the right amount of food for your population. So it's believed that the priests played a kind of vital role here in praying to the different gods and goddesses to make sure that the fertility goddess provided good harvests, that the river gods and goddesses provided the proper flooding, in order to be that connection between the people and the gods they worshipped. This would give them a lot of power in society. Now, the cities of this region were not believed to be politically connected under a single emperor or king or ruler or whatever you want to call them. Instead, the cities were each seemed to be ruled by individual priests or priest groups, and they weren't united politically. They shared a common culture, common religious beliefs, common technology, but politically they were separate from each other. At least that's the belief we have. These cities, each individually, or as I said, were likely ruled by either a priest or a group of priests that ruled based on the religious beliefs of their culture. We call this a theocracy, a government ruled by religious beliefs. All right, let's take a little deeper into these theocracies, these religious governments. Now, again, there's not a whole lot we can say in this entry-level survey class, but there are some things that we do strongly believe of based on the evidence that I think it's important to know about this culture. So the first thing we want to note about this culture is that it seems to be more about social equality and not the strict hierarchies we've been talking about. This means that it was more egalitarian, kind of like we were talking about in those Paleolithic tribes. How do we know this? Well, some of the evidence points to this is that the houses were all very kind of similar to each other in their design, maybe not always in size, but in design. They all had access to bathing areas inside each home, sanitation areas inside even the smaller homes. This seems to indicate that these cultures, at least the way people lived, was relatively equal. And there wasn't really a lot of evidence of weapons in the society. And this is kind of interesting, right? You go to Mesopotamia, you go to Egypt, you go to all those places, and you're going to see like remains of a lot of weapons indicating that there was warfare going on. But there were very few weapons found in these valleys from this region, indicating that the people were relatively peaceful, at least between the cities. Now, of course, there were fortification citadels found, but not a lot of weapons or damage caused by weapons that you'd expect to find if there's a lot of warfare. We also think that each city had a centralized authority. That means they had a structured government, at least. And the evidence that points to this is the fact that the cities are kind of uniform in design, meaning someone seems to be telling them where they should be placing things, right? It's not haphazard. There's a clear plan here. In order for that to happen, you would really kind of need a strong government to coordinate both the design and construction of this in order to get the large number of people necessary to build these things to actually work together and fulfill that design. Large structures like granaries where they'd keep their extra food, assembly halls, also suggest that the government had some planning here, and there's some community organization. After all, every house had their own kind of bathing area and toiletry areas, and the massive sewer system. That's not something one person or one small family is going to be able to accomplish on their own. That takes a lot of people working together. In order for that to happen, you kind of need a government of some type to get people to do that. At least that's the theory. And the power in these governments was likely based on religion, and this is going to be a common theme in this class, right? Why did the priests be in charge of the government? It's because they claim that they can communicate with the gods for good harvests and for safe flooding. We're going to see a lot of this in history, where government leaders, whether it's a king, an emperor, or whatever it is, claim that their authority comes from God or gods, either because they are a god themselves or because they can communicate with the gods. So they'll answer the question, why do you get to be in charge? It's because the gods want to be in charge. And if you challenge me, you challenge the gods. And this is a pretty good way of controlling people if they believe in your faith. Okay, so well then what happened to this culture? We're not 100% sure, but we have some ideas and some theories here. Around 1750 BCE, so that's about 3,700 or so years ago, there was evidence of earthquake activity in this region, tectonic plates shifting, creating earthquakes. People could interpret this as signs from the gods, but more importantly, this can create problems with your rivers. River courses, which seem steady and constant, right? The river is always flowing in that direction, but when the plates shift, the earth moves, and actually the course, the direction these rivers take through the landscape can also shift as well. That means in some areas where the rivers were, again, where you get all your water for farming and that silver farming, the rivers dry up, making the farming villages uninhabitable for large populations. You also remember those rivers were also important for trade routes, which means the cities would start to dry up. There wouldn't be food coming in from the farming villages and the farmland that surrounds it, and there wouldn't be those resources coming from the trade routes as the rivers had shifted courses. So all of this would disrupt agriculture and trade and force a lot of people to abandon these cities. At least that's one theory. Another theory is that the problem could have been more man-made. So as you farm in an area, you use up the nutrients in the soil. Sure, the flooding can bring new nutrients, but that's only in areas that have regular flooding. And with less nutrients, every year when you plant the same crops in the same spots, the quality and quantity of the crops you produce will start to lower and lower over time, which will eventually lead to food shortages and famines. Now, of course, if earthquakes and river shifting is happening at the same time, that's only going to exacerbate the problem. And then finally, there is some cultural shifts happening. Around the year 15 BCE, so again, it's about 3,500 years ago, around the same time these earthquakes are happening, there's a group of people known as Aryans that are coming in from kind of this central region between what we think of Asia and what we think of as Europe, and they're migrating both west into Europe, east into this region up here where the Mongols are going to be, but they're also migrating around 1500 BCE down into the Indus Valley. They're going to bring with them new ideas, new cultures, and that's going to mix with the Indus Valley cultures and going to create what we think of more modern Indian culture today, including the Hindu faith, which we'll be talking about in coming lessons. This mixing will create new cultures and eventually new empires that will dominate the region. Now, I know what you might be thinking. You hear the word Aryan, and you might jump right to the Aryan race, quote unquote, Nazis and all of that. Aryans are believed to be a people that originated in this region right here, east of Europe, up on the western edges of Asia, that migrated out. And this group did actually exist, but they weren't blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white people that the Nazis you think of when you think of the Nazis, right? That's a totally different thing. But yeah, it's all kind of connected to this idea. It's also one of the reasons why the swastika, which is a Hindu image or Hindu symbol, starts to pop up in Nazi propaganda thousands of years later because of this believed connection to the Aryan nomads that migrated into the region. So weird history, but it's all connected, and that's why it's important we study this. All right, so let's take a quick look at the timescale here. So here we are in the year 2025 when I'm filming this. If we go back in time 9,000 years, that's when we get that early evidence of farming in the Indus Valley. But then you have to fast forward here, about 4,000 years before you get these early villages forming. It takes another, not quite 1,000 years, but maybe 700 or so years before we get major cities developing. Those cities develop and thrive for not quite 1,000 years, maybe 1,700 years. They're kind of growing independently, trading ideas with each other. And that's right when the earthquakes hit and the Aryan nomads start to migrate into the region. So we're really looking in this lesson at a period of time that stretches not quite 6,000 years. That is a lot of time, a lot going on, and we only just touched the surface of this, and we're still learning more about this culture every day and every year as historians and archaeologists are learning more and more and studying this culture. All right, as always, I want you to end these notes by rewriting the goal that was at the beginning of this video, or go back to the top of your note sheet and just type it out, write that goal so you know what it was you were supposed to have learned today. Then I want you to go look through those notes and write out 3 important facts that help show you understand that goal or could be used to help you demonstrate mastery of this goal. And then as always, show that intellectual curiosity. Take about 30 seconds, stop, think about what we talked about here, what you just watched, what you just took notes on, and write a question, something you're still curious about. I will respond to you on the Google Docs if you're taking my class. If you're watching this on YouTube, I guess drop a comment, maybe I'll respond. But that's what I want you guys to do. All right, fantastic. We'll see you in class.